Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 25 being recorded on June 23rd, 2022. I went light on the preparation today as I was just discussing with the chat. Not sure if this is going to make it over to YouTube or not, but basically there's just been a flood of really horrendous current events. I haven't really had time to sift through it all, but I did feel like chatting with the live stream audience, and we'll just chat. We'll see where it goes today, but I don't have a ton of articles. We were just discussing COVID. We'll probably get back into that in a minute. BA4 and BA5 are on the rise in the United States. Those newer variants are currently between 15 and 20% of the overall COVID load, possibly higher because it takes time to do the sequencing and identification. So it may be closer to 25 or 30% by now. The overall COVID load per biobot.io that is detected in the wastewater is starting to come down a little bit after a long plateau for like a month that is as big as any previous surge except for Omicron. But I'm wondering if it's going to keep going down as BA4 and BA5 come in. BA5, which is not only highly contagious, like all the post-Omicron stuff, but is also virulent. It has some of the Delta characteristics, which was very severe. So anyway, that is going to be pushing out BA2 and related subvariants of BA2. And we'll see that in the next month or two, what the effects of BA4 and BA5 are. We know from the UK, and things don't exactly mirror the UK in the US for various reasons, but we see that currently BA4 and BA5 are driving a huge spike in hospitalizations and just across the board. They are both highly contagious and very severe. We're probably due for a COVID update. I have probably 8 or 9 pretty big articles. I just really haven't had time to put it together, even for the live stream. But one of the things I was just discussing with the chat is how COVID greatly, well, not only suppresses your general immune response, specifically your T cells. We've covered this in previous COVID updates. Those findings have since been reconfirmed by a number of other studies. COVID has dramatic effects in terms of suppressing your T cell count. This is not exactly the same as what happens with HIV and AIDS, but some parts of it are much more similar than you would like them to be at all. I mean, your naive T cells are kind of like the basis of your immune system. COVID seems to all but wipe them out in some people. So not good times at all. That, as well as a lot of studies coming out this week, are finding that the more that you get COVID, each subsequent reinfection is going to hit you worse than the last because of particular tricks it plays on your immune system. Basically, your immune system remembers, oh, I never changed the, see, this is what kind of day I'm having. We're still on the starting soon screen. That's where I'm at today. See, this is why I'm not sure if this is going to make it over to YouTube, but we'll see. Anyway, where was I? So your immune system basically remembers the first variant that you got infected with, and then if you get infected with other variants subsequently, it's still going to be treating them a lot more like it was that first thing, and it just winds up hitting you harder. So you don't want to get COVID a first time. You especially don't want to get COVID more than once. Each subsequent reinfection is going to hit you worse than the last. We covered in the sort of last batch of COVID articles that there's a big study out of Latvia that showed that people over 60 in particular had dramatically more mortality, that would be death, in the 12 months following a COVID infection. In other words, if you're over 60, increased mortality is a significant part of long COVID. But with multiple reinfections, it's not necessarily 60 anymore. It does massive inflammation throughout your major organ systems, and we're treating it like it's nothing. But if you get infected 3, 4, 5 times, who knows how many decades that is chopping off of your life. Yes, you may survive this year, but you may develop heart problems, liver problems, nervous system problems, immune problems, who knows what, 3 or 4 years from now. We don't know. Why? Because it's a novel virus, and it is literally new on the face of this earth. We just don't know all the particulars yet. We'll know 10 years from now, but there will be an enormous human cost by then because most of the governments of the world are just letting it run rampant and ravage the population. Don't catch this thing. It's, for me, trying to live in this society, the United States, that is letting a disease this severe just wantonly spread is terrifying. I mean, I can't really, I have not come to terms with it, and I probably never will. And it's horrifying. You know, there's no point. There's no point at all, except, again, you know, business as usual. The airlines have been lobbying for things to be open, and, you know, I think in the UK, the Heathrow airport workers have been striking. Saw something about that quickly, like 10,000 workers striking over this. And that's on top of the people who are already out for long COVID. So, you know, as somebody was tweeting, you don't get to both complain about, or, like, you know, argue for things to be open and then complain when people are out sick because of the disease that you said that, you know, people should just work through. It's a serious disease. Biden administration absolutely pissing in our faces. There's no other way to put it. Maybe shitting on our heads. Maybe that's another way to put it. But anyway. So yeah, I didn't really grab a ton of articles aside from that sort of COVID check-in. We'll just be kind of winging it today. Let's see what's going on with the chat. So scrolling up to the top here. So really, chat today, it's on you. This is all about you. We're just going to be talking with the chat. Got some good people in the chat, some regulars, a couple people who are regulars in other arenas, but are first-time live stream viewers, I believe. So let's see. One positive thing a commenter saw was that the Michigan governor signed some child care bills. Haven't looked into them, but on the surface it looks promising. Well, I don't know. I mean, if we know anything about the Democrats, it's not going to be proportional to the actual problems we're facing. Hang on, Siren. Okay, I think maybe we're missing the siren. Anyway. What's for dinner tonight? I have no idea. I have some idea, but we're not sure yet. I don't know, what's for your dinner tonight? I see you've been going off on some infracell orbiter guy. Good job. Yeah, I've been following on Twitter the Patsock Moments account, which is, you know, amusing, and the tweets pop up a lot in the feed. Honestly, all the people with the infracell EFPs, where they got that sort of Earth with the different colors and the wavy pattern on it. If you see one of those, just, you know that the most absolutely brain-dead, garbled nonsense is about to come your way. I honestly don't like interacting with it. I'm out to try to educate people and do some agitation and encourage people to go get organized. The last thing I really want to do is get bogged down with one of those absolute just asshats. But yeah, some person came up with the populism is communism thing. You don't get to say that when you're promoting the guy in Colombia who was literally saying, like, Hitler was a great leader, over the leftist guy. You don't get to say shit like that. I mean, it's utterly nuts. And I handed them a bunch of readings about Lenin talking about populism. And they just came back with, I'd love to discuss this in a space. It always comes down to them wanting attention in some way. Don't give it to them. So I insulted them a few times and blocked them. And then, you know, that was the end of that. But, you know, I gave them a chance to make some sense. For fuck's sake, understand something. I don't know what it is, but there's something severely wrong with those people in general. I really haven't seen one yet who was reasonable. Not a single one. The level of state abandonment regarding COVID is pretty depressing. We are on our own for the foreseeable future. Yeah, and it's not going to hold together. This whole like, getting COVID or not is a personal choice. That's not gonna last. I mean, this thing has debilitating, disabling effects. And at most, they can run this for another year or two before. I mean, people always use that phrase of like, people dying in the streets. You're going to literally have that. In terms of millions of people, tens of millions of people maybe unable to work, because we know from some of the previous COVID updates that we've done that many people get neurological symptoms with long COVID, and 59%, according to one study, of people who get neurological symptoms were unable to return to work, and 50% of them, only slightly less, were unable to do other daily activities. So it's debilitating. And in other countries where long COVID is more recognized, more people have looked at this, said, yes, I have long COVID, and they're not going back to work. This is going to be a massive problem for the system. It's probably not going to take that long. So they just literally can't run this the way that they have been without enormous consequences, because what we've seen is that the variants keep getting more contagious and more virulent. This whole thing of like, oh, variants breed themselves out, they get milder over time. That's utter horseshit. I mean, that's just not true of anything. And it's definitely not true. It's demonstrably untrue in the case of COVID, very clearly. So there's a lot of just desperation and dishonesty going around with that. So I don't know if I mentioned since starting recording, but a commenter says an 18-year-old I work with has had COVID 4 times. Will that person live to see 40? We don't know, but bad stuff, There are reports of obviously, younger healthy people dying from it, but also younger healthy people who exercise regularly having to get pacemakers installed because it just damaged their heart that much. So yeah. Can COVID have long-term effects if a person only had mild symptoms? Yes. It's basically the more severe the acute phase, the likelier it is, like the more certain it makes it that you're going to get long COVID, basically. If you get hospitalized, your odds go up to like 60% that you're going to get long COVID symptoms. Because again, if you get hospitalized, it's not like you walk out, I've said this many times, it's not like you walk out of the hospital like, wow, feeling great, just really needed a brief hospital stay. If you get COVID to the severity where you need to be hospitalized and need like medical assistance, it has done massive damage in your body. And again, what are the organs it targets? Anywhere with ACE2 receptors, the brainstem, the heart, the lungs, your kidneys, your liver, etc. So major organ systems, vital organs that keep you alive and you cannot do without. So the more damage you sustain during the acute phase, that seems to have a relationship with long COVID. However, you can be asymptomatic and still get long COVID. In fact, I think below a certain threshold, it doesn't really matter whether you're asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. Your odds of getting long COVID are basically the same. They go up after being hospitalized, but at the lower levels, it's like, I think you're just as likely to get long COVID, no matter how severe it is. So, did we see this Mark Cuban stuff? He is investing in cheaper life-saving drugs and selling them at a fraction of the price. People, yes, I saw that months back. I know I did see it recently. People were complaining about like, okay, it's nice that he's selling generic drugs for cheaper, but he's still selling them at a markup. Like he's making significant profit off of it. So that, anyway, people are all over the internet confused, and also some are just simping for billionaires. I piggyback off of Lenin's closing points in a recent audiobook, The Draft of a New Law on Strikes. This is connected to the Mark Cuban comment, stating that concessions are given when they fear for their power. I think that this is more commonly understood when there's a specific demand from the population, say for Medicare for all, and the government grants the masses reforms to try and placate us in order to secure the capitalist system so we won't revolt. Obviously, the government is so corrupt, they're now allowing billionaires to look like humanitarians. How are we to understand this issue? Can you see the scenario where private entities fill the social role of reform now that corporate power is becoming absolute? How are we to understand this Mark Cuban in a class lens? Well, he's a libertarian. So, I mean, you can, I think, start out with his stated ideology, which he follows fairly closely. We'll come back to that. Is it just marketing? Is it general social unrest has some members trying to do private reforms in order to preserve capitalism? Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think there's elements of that, but the whole like libertarian right-wing thing as regards healthcare is, drum roll please, deregulated. So their whole thing, and Trump said this, and they all say this, is increase, increase competition along interstate, interstate lines. They just think that, you know, competition is going to be good for prices and stuff like that. When you have like effectively a monopoly, you get effective collusion. So that doesn't actually result in that necessarily. The medical system in the United States is, I mean, just speaking offhandedly, just such a racket. They are truly a mafia, and if anything really disturbs that, they're not going to stand for it. Like you will see reaction for sure. You will see backlash. You will see efforts to keep the profits up. So, yeah, I mean, I think that this, on Cuban's part, like, I don't know all the details. He and I don't, like, chat or anything, but, you know, you could see it as a bona fide libertarian attempt, not only to make money, as everything libertarian is all about that, but also to sort of prove their theory that, you know, the free market is good for everybody, it's going to lower prices, blah, blah, blah. I think that when we talk about reforming the system, the ACA, also known as Obamacare, is a much better example of that. That truly was written by the insurance industry, and all the talk that the chatter, the noise that the GOP was making about, we're going to repeal Obamacare. No, you're not. That was so deeply embedded in the medical billing system, there's no way you're getting it out. The interests that put it there were not working class interests, it was insurance companies. And it's making the scam a bit more inclusive, I guess, but it's not a good deal. So that's the kind of reforms that they do. I think people like Mark Cuban, on their best days, they view themselves as sort of disruptors, you know, to the extent that they really drink the Kool-Aid and believe in any of this sort of idealist nonsense of like, this is going to be liberating, you know, any vestiges of like actual like market, you know, what is it, agorism, like any vestiges of like, I'm some kind of, you know, anarchist, you know, I'm this pirate and I'm going to come in and shake up the system. You know, I think some of them believe that a little bit, and there may be vestiges of that sort of idealism, that social idealism of like, capitalism is going to save people. There are some diehard libertarians who actually still believe that stuff, that it's like actually good for society. There may be elements of that. Obviously, they're wrong, but yeah, we'll see where it goes. I wouldn't be surprised if some larger company just buys it, which is usually what happens with like that's, people need to understand the whole process of like building a business in the United States. Most small businesses fail within their first couple of years. 50%, maybe the stats are probably much higher now. But for a long time, it was like 50% of small business, like startups, fail in the first 2 years. So if you make it past the first 2 years, great, you've already beaten a lot of the odds. Then what is the goal? Well, you're petty bourgeois, you're working in your own business, you can't afford to just, you know, live off of your employees. That takes time. So you're trying to build it up to that point. And then honestly, running a business, it's a huge hassle. It's a lot of work. And, you know, it's a lot of records to take care of, and you got to make sure that there are managers and all kinds of stuff. You know, from that capitalist point of view, it's a headache. What they would much rather do is build it up, then have some larger competitor buy it from them, and then they take that golden parachute and ride out the rest of their days. You know, some of the diehards do want to really get into empire building, and they want to be one of those huge capitalists themselves. So some of them have those kinds of aspirations. Many other people, surviving the like harrowing process of starting up a business, really just want somebody to come along and take it off their hands for the right price. Many people, unless they're just, you know, sort of born to be a small business owner. And some people are. You meet these people sometimes. They're just like, they never stop. They're self-promoters. They're go-getters. They're always trying to sell you something. Like it's just in their blood. It's like a disease. But, you know, that's the way some people are, I guess. Many people are like, I had an idea and I started a business because I believed in my idea. And this is how, in this country, we get products or services out to people. But the process is so brutal that they're like, please, someone take this off my hands after a while. So, yeah, anyway, I forget where I was going with that. So that's an excellent point to end on. Maybe we'll come back. Okay, somebody else says, I saw that Mark Cuban stuff, and as a disabled person reliant on medication, I don't want to count on a gracious billionaire to have a shot at a normal life. Yeah, which is like I was talking about, Cuban building it up, and really if it seriously started threatening somebody's profits, they would just buy it from him. And believe me, the medical industry in the United States has the money to do that. Like in a hostile way, whatever. I mean, I don't know if it's public yet, but they have ways, you know, we have ways. So what happens then? You know, you get all set with your Mark Cuban hookup and great. Okay, you're saving some money for now, but you're really just depending on like his goodwill to do that. It's not, you know, anything where there's shared social responsibility. It's just riding on his private interest in maintaining that business. So anyway, that's how business works. Let's see. In Burkina Faso, the socialist leadership's first objective was to vaccinate the population. In the 80s, there were some good memes about that, yeah. Yeah, and on the Cuban thing, if there are good short-term results, then you won't complain. Like, yeah, get the deal where you can get it, but it isn't a stable system, and that's the thing that we need to recognize. It's here today, will it be here tomorrow? And then what are you supposed to do tomorrow if it's not? Wait for some other fucking billionaire to come along and, like, have the same, you know, whim? That's no way to run a society. So, how concerned am I about recombination of COVID, SARS coronavirus 2, and MERS? I hadn't really seen anything about that. So I don't know. Do you have a link on that? I'd be happy to look at it. I really haven't seen anything about recombination there. I think that the mutations and recombination just within COVID is bad enough. Like just what's happening already is significantly awful. So I don't think we need to necessarily go to a scenario like that to be extraordinarily concerned. We need to stop transmission. We need to shut down, again, everything in order to do that. Honestly, China has the right idea on that. Whatever their shortcomings may be in terms of like backing off possibly too much from socialism, they are doing the right thing on COVID. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't really know. I'm not sure if anyone knows what would happen if SARS and MERS were to have babies. But if you know something about that, I'd be interested in seeing about it. So, oh, any suggested reading? Oh, on Burkina Faso. Yeah, and somebody suggests our Communism 101, which you know, I block a lot of people. I'll admit it. I'm trying to stay forward. Maybe at some day, not at some day, maybe at some point or someday. I often try to say two phrases at once, and the take luck phenomenon. But anyway, I block a lot of people. Maybe someday I will get to a point where I will let them back in, although many of them flatly don't deserve to come back in ever. Some maybe do, but anyway, I have to keep the channel moving forward and growing, and for now, that is the best strategy for me. Maybe at some point I won't. However, the Reddit forum, Communism 101, as well as Our Communism, give me a fucking break. They block people probably more than I do. Probably a lot more than I do. Pretty crazy stuff. Socialism will never work. Well, it already has. So you can have a nice seat in the quiet part of the audience. Now, Genghis Khan 223. Bye-bye. Do I think that China's lockdown efforts are in vain or worthless now that the capitalist world has declared the pandemic and lockdowns over? No, not at all. First of all, they've saved over 1 million lives and how many people from being disabled? So no, not at all. Also, I think that it's getting harder to sustain it, but they need to keep the fight up. Absolutely, it's the right thing to do. And no, because who knows when the next Omicron-like spike is going to happen. They need to keep that example going. And no, they're preventing death and disease, so there's nothing worthless about it at all. So they're just so big, for how long is it worth it? Isn't it getting bad in China inevitable? No, who has put these horrible ideas in your head? They've gone 2.5 years, and now they're having to wrestle with, oh no, 800 cases, an outbreak. How many cases are going on in the US on a daily basis, in the tens of thousands? So they're able to maintain this thing at like 4 or 5 digits. The US has had 1 million deaths alone. So no, it isn't inevitable. And really just take that word out, because this is just suicidal thinking. You know, it's like you're trying to cross a tightrope, and you're just telling yourself that falling is inevitable. Well, you know, at a certain point, if you start believing that, you're going to slip. You can't do that. So you need to have discipline. And you need to maybe understand that as the virus gets tougher and there's more pressure on them to do different things, that it may get more difficult. But to think that you can't substantially mitigate damage, and by substantially I mean 90-95%, to think that that's worthless is just completely backward. So I don't know where you got that idea from, but no, that logic doesn't hold up for 2 seconds. Next comment, my employer had me back to work after my COVID diagnosis. 6 days is what I had to recover. Well, you were probably still contagious, honestly. According to CDC guidelines, I was okay to return to work and would have probably faced disciplinary shit if I had refused. Well, unfortunately, I don't know if you were wearing an N95 when you went back. You probably spread it to other people when you went back. Not trying to guilt you. I'm just saying, like, that's what happens, because this is a virus. It doesn't care. It doesn't care. It doesn't care about business. It doesn't care about government. You know, it's like the right wing's always saying facts don't care about your feelings. COVID really doesn't care about your feelings at all. So, you know, that's unfortunate. But yeah, you were probably still contagious and maybe spread it to somebody while you were there, maybe to more than one person. So, I don't know. I mean, that's the entire comment. I don't know what else to say, but yeah, that situation is going on all over the place. It makes me want to scream. I mean, I want to tear my hair out. It's horrific watching the situation. Utterly horrific. We had the worst outbreak of COVID so far, Omicron, just 5 months ago. And the capitalist media, their lapdogs, were declaring during it that COVID is over. Excuse me, biggest wave ever and over are polar opposites. You know, my video on that was titled "The Pandemic May Just Be Beginning," which I think is a more accurate thing. And there's no sign so far that there's any signs of the pandemic being remotely over. In fact, let me, I'm going to put up, I know I have recent, today's, we'll just put this up on the screen for now. Today's BioBot, which just got updated last night. They usually update Wednesday night, and then it's up by Thursday. Just put that today. Put the wrong date. Anyway. Yeah, that is the wrong date. This is last week. So you can see right there the plateau. Now, okay, it's been updated as of this week. So there is like a right shoulder. It's starting to drop now. Although, again, as BA4 and BA5 come in, I would suspect it'll go back up. But anyway, that's the absolute COVID load. This is what's detected in the sewage, so you don't have to deal with all the politics of which cases are getting counted and blah, blah, blah. This is the COVID that's out there. You can plainly see it's as bad as anything but Omicron. Why was Omicron so bad, by the way? Well, it was the late fall and winter. That's when people are at their weakest. The most people naturally die in January every year. It goes up in November, December, January, February. So that's what we saw in the 2020 to 2021 winter as well. It was a big sustained, and that was, pre-vaccine too, big sustained surge. Well, we're having a sustained surge right now that, if it comes out to be symmetrical, will be just as big as that first winter pre-vaccine. Back then they were counting all the cases, so that light blue line was closer to the, COVID in the wastewater line. But now they're not counting as many cases, which is bullshit. They're having people do rapid tests. Those don't get counted. And then even on the PCR test, they find ways to exclude people from the official count to try to make it look like this thing's over. It's clearly not. So this is where we're at. There's absolutely no reason to think that this thing is stopping at all. I feel like I could be happy just saying that sentence over and over again until somebody started doing something about it. People are all too content to just go along with this. And it's insane. People are making themselves sicker and weaker and dying because of it. We're in a surge right now that is as big as anything except for Omicron. It's bigger than Delta at this point. It's more sustained than the Delta wave, which is that one from July 2021 to October, November 2021, the pointy one right before Omicron. So this is what we're looking at. Do we have any reason to think that the current wave is going to be the last wave? No, there's no reason to think that whatsoever. It's going to keep mutating. You get new variants coming out of it because that's what happens when it just spreads. I don't know how else to explain this. I mean, honestly, and if I know this, believe me that the epidemiologists at the WHO know this. They don't care. They don't care. The CDC doesn't care. They don't fucking care. They're captured by capitalists. That's who really runs the system. That's who really makes decisions. If you try to go against them, you get fired. That's what happens. So we need to end the system because it's completely constraining science. You can't actually get public policy that's based on science in a society that is based around seeking quarterly profits, or best yearly profits. And that's what's going on. So this is the situation that we're in, and it's going to keep happening. BA4 and BA5 are the worst things we know of so far with COVID. Mark my words, 6 weeks from now, there will be something else because the COVID is going to keep evolving. The other thing is the booster immunity wears out. As I was saying before, there's a thing called original antigenic sin where your immune system recognizes the first strain that you get, and then it treats all the subsequent variants like that first strain. So you have a subpar response to all the subsequent things because your immune system is still treating it like it's that first thing, which it isn't. And unfortunately, COVID is something that happens with. So you're really more susceptible to each round of reinfection. And we're seeing reinfections as soon as 30 days after, in the Omicron and after, BA1 and everything after. People are getting it 30, 60, 90 days. They're getting COVID again. What you need is antibodies, like active antibodies to neutralize the thing as it enters your system. Just having immune memory, which is faulty in this case, is not enough. But the boosters now, I got my booster in December, and that was half a year ago. And my coverage from that is virtually nothing at this point. So I'm like wide open and exposed. I mean, I got sick a couple times in the last few months. I don't know if any of them were COVID. I didn't have any positive rapid tests, but I had weird symptoms that I don't usually get from like a cold. So I don't know. Maybe I had it. Maybe I didn't. Nothing feels right anymore. Like I don't even know. I have like bizarre symptoms now that I've like never had before. So who knows? But when we get into this fall, and it's right around the corner, we're in late June. So we got in 1 month late July, then late August, then we're into late September and fall starts. So what happens then? Do we get booster shots then? They're starting to unveil the Omicron booster. Guess what? Omicron is extinct. So that's already out of date. And we're getting new strains like every 2 months. It's just, yes, they're decent at raising some protection, but this is not an end to the pandemic. The vaccines do not end the pandemic. Only stopping transmission can do that. How do you stop that? Mask mandates, and serious masks, not cloth masks that are just like, trying to use like a colander to carry water. It just goes right through. Cloth masks really, I mean, it can stop some of the droplets, but you have to pair them at least with a surgical mask. N95 or KN95, although I would recommend N95. It has better ear loops and, or not ear loops, but like head loops. And also you can get some better quality assurance here in the US. KN95 is a Chinese standard, and nothing against China. It's just we're not in China. So people faking the KN95 standard won't get in as much trouble in the US as they would in China. So if you're in the US, apparently there was a study that said 60% of the KN95s that they studied were counterfeit. They didn't actually offer the protection. N95 is a US standard, so if you fake those in the US, you get into serious trouble. Anyway, for me, for what it's worth, I would go with those because I think that there's a higher chance of them not being counterfeit. Not to say there aren't any N95 counterfeits out there, but I think you're less likely to encounter it. I use the N95s for that reason. But anyway, and shutdowns and all the rest of it, like for example, that China does, that's how you actually stop this thing. I mean, I'm worn out. We've been doing this thing for 2.5 years now. It's not any better. It's not any better. And probably this winter, we're going to get another Omicron-like spike, especially if people don't get another round of booster going into the fall, which some of the US, European countries are mulling over. At first, they were saying they're going to give people boosters every 4 or 5 months. Then they canceled that. I don't know why, honestly, but they canceled it. But now they're like mulling over. Maybe we'll give people a 4th shot in, I guess they're giving it to elderly people only now in a lot of places. But they're like, maybe we'll do a general booster shot in the fall. I mean, honestly, like, they'd better, because if they don't, I think that the amount of havoc that the late fall into winter strain, whatever it is at that point will be, I think it's going to be really bad. We have no reason to think otherwise. Let's put it that way. When you're trying to make predictions on this, obviously nothing's for certain. But, look, for example, at the October 2020 to January 2021, that curve from the previous winter. Then you see what happened in the spring afterwards. It comes down in like February into March. And then you get kind of a plateau through April, and then it drops. And then in May, June, that was when they did mask or vax, and they ended the mask mandate, just as COVID was starting to come down. We still had a mask mandate at that point. Then it goes into a lull. Biden declares mission accomplished. And then we get Delta, which was a game changer because it was far more contagious and far more virulent. And then we get Omicron. Well, anyway, look at that little pattern from October 20, January 21 into like February, March 21. Then it's followed by a plateau. Well, look at what happened this winter. So we had Delta, which was a massive thing. And it didn't start just in October. It started back in July. And then we got huge Omicron. Now we're having another plateau. But the plateau this time, just like Omicron, is 3.5, 4 times as high as the previous winter spike. The plateau that follows it, the spring plateau, is 3 or 4 times bigger than last year's spring plateau. So do we have any reason to think that this thing is getting better? No. Do we have reason to think it's getting worse? Yes. The variants are more contagious, and things like BA.5 in particular are more virulent. So every reason to think that there's an incoming shit show, really no reason to think otherwise. And again, you know, if people don't get reboosted, it's going to be that much worse because the variants are now worse. So if you go into like the current variants unprotected, it's going to be like really bad. Anyway, we'll get the other screen going up and I'm going to delve back into the chat. All right. Raising children right now is fucking horrific. Yeah. 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 That was my first thought when all this started. Yes, definitely. Let's see. I think it's a great idea to talk about how, when you're reading books or learning something that's written by someone that isn't a principled Marxist, understanding liberal framing versus Marxist and learning to read between the lines. Yeah, so this is something people really need to do. I keep like mentioning that I have plans to eventually do more of a series on critical thinking and evaluating evidence independently, like quality of evidence, credibility, and so on. Because what a lot of people do right now is they just look at the author of something or the outlet where it was published. And don't get me wrong, sometimes that is something to be considered for sure. Different publications have different standards, and they oftentimes, you know, reflect different political lines. That's not to say, though, that factually everything that they're publishing is incorrect and that you can't gain anything by reading it. This is where being able to evaluate evidence independently comes in. So, yeah, I mean, I feel confident that I can read virtually anything and, you know, be able to read between the lines and get something out of it. And really, you have to, because how many principled Marxists are there writing? And even then, you know, how many principled Marxists who've never been accused of revisionism or etc. So yeah, you always have to be able to do that. That is key. In fact, I was just looking at a thread. I don't think I have retweeted it yet, although I plan to, and maybe I had. It was by your communist dad on Twitter. And maybe it's over here, just like, there it is. All right. So they did a thread. This is at @communistdad on Twitter. And they started a thread off. It's from June 22nd. And it says, some quick thoughts on liberal framing and reading between the lines with bourgeois authors in the context of David Talbot's excellent book, The Devil's Chessboard, Alan Dulles, The CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government. So that's the name of the book. And so basically this is a thread that this account did. I'll just read a little bit of it. Learning from liberals is a critical skill for Marxists. As the hegemonic ideology of the bourgeoisie, liberalism pervades nearly every source of information available to us. Like Marx and Lenin, we must rely on liberals' observations while criticizing their conclusions. That's key. Liberals and Marxists study the same phenomena and attempt to discern deeper structures by applying various conceptual models to their observations. Each observer brings a different toolbox of theories and concepts to bear on the problem, producing different results. In other words, they're applying different types of analyses. Liberals will analyze a situation in one way, Marxists will analyze it in another, and so you come to different conclusions. Favored concepts employed by liberals include liberty versus tyranny, rights and civil liberties, power as a morally corrupting force, individual vices and psychopathology, actions of great men, capitalized, cultural, ideological, and religious differences, conspiracy, greed, and corruption. Liberals tend to disfavor concepts like class interest and struggle, capital accumulation, colonialism, imperialism, economic coercion, and historic development. Liberal thinkers may employ some of these concepts, but rarely all of them. If they did, they wouldn't be liberals. Let me just, by the way, I'm going to retweet this right now. If you want to read along as I do this, or go to it after the fact, there's more to the thread. An ideology constructed by and for an emerging colonialist bourgeoisie, liberalism's core concepts have been carefully constructed in order to denigrate feudal and absolutist autocracy. So, like, that's their version of rights, is against feudalism and monarchism, while naturalizing and celebrating colonialism, chattel slavery, and capitalist exploitation. In other words, features of old system bad, features of new system okay, or we just won't talk about them, or, hey, maybe they're just, quote, human nature, you can't do anything about it. The class interest of the liberal project leads to very predictable blind spots. A liberal writer can never be expected to draw even the most obvious inference if it risks highlighting the hideous and pervasive exploitation at the heart of Western capitalism and liberal democracy. Talbot's book demonstrates both strong analysis and frustrating if predictable shortcomings. It's worth reading. You can find an audiobook here, and I've uploaded both PDF and EPUB files to the link in the bio. Talbot writes at length about American collusion with former Nazis, led by Allen Dulles and the emerging CIA. One such case was Reinhard Gehlen, talking about him in the last stream, head of German intelligence on the Eastern Front, who employed widespread torture to locate Jews and other enemies for extermination. After the war, Gehlen and his entire intelligence network were incorporated wholesale into U.S. intelligence operations, became the backbone of West Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, which Gehlen oversaw until 1968. The Gehlen organization was instrumental in establishing Nazi Rotlines, helping relocate fleeing fascist war criminals abroad. Many of these Nazi men settled in Latin America, where their services were employed by brutal right-wing dictatorships against progressive movements. The Gehlen organization also proved useful by establishing connections with fascist groups in Ukraine, such as Stepan Bandera's OUN and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, both of which had collaborated with the Nazis and committed genocidal pogroms against Jews, Roma, and Poles. Gehlen and the CIA supported these fascist guerrillas and assisted many in relocating to the U.S. and Canada, Operation Paperclip, where they spent the next 70 years rebranding as freedom fighters. Following the CIA-led 2014 coup, Bandera is celebrated as a hero in today's Ukraine. James Critchfield, born in North Dakota in 1917, was the man responsible for recommending and overseeing the integration of the Gehlen organization into U.S. intelligence. Critchfield's men and their families lived alongside former SS men and their families, integrating. Critchfield admired Gehlen's, quote, high standard of morality, and declared, quote, impersonal characteristics, apparent values, and thoughts about the future of Germany and Europe, these ex-Nazi officers did not seem to me significantly different from my contemporaries in the U.S. Army, unquote. What does that tell you about the U.S. Army? Despite Critchfield's open declaration of his agreement with Gehlen and the Nazis, Talbot simply refuses to believe him. He instead frames Critchfield as victim, a, quote, simple, trusting American, Mark taken advantage of by Gehlen, a man of, quote, rat-like cunning. All a conspiracy, I tell you. Talbot's liberalism and belief in American goodness completely blinds him to something clearly articulated by his own source, the affinity between the USA and the Third Reich, which modeled Lebensraum on Manifest Destiny and Nuremberg race laws on Jim Crow. If that is true, Hitler talked about it. A better equipped analyst would have noted Critchfield's childhood in North Dakota, site of the Wounded Knee Massacre, marked the conclusion of the Indian Wars, an accomplishment celebrated with the construction of Mount Rushmore when Critchfield was 10. Is it any wonder that a man raised in a settler colony, still reveling in the elimination of a people deemed racially and culturally inferior, would find affinity with Nazis attempting to fulfill a similar destiny? Talbot's motivated credulity would have us believe this a mystery. Talbot repeatedly notes the connections between the Dulles brothers. This is set up the CIA, corporate clients, and the Nazi war machine, but consistently does so in a way that reframes these connections as a form of personal moral corruption, rather than noting a rational common class interest. Talbot similarly misunderstands the firmly petty bourgeois background of CIA contractor Robert Mayhew, mentioning his exclusion from the inner circles, but failing to note the supporting role played by the petty bourgeoisie in sustaining capitalism, including fascist violence. Talbot spends more time describing the psychology, childhood traumas, and personal relationships of Dulles and other figures than he does examining the class interests they represent. While interesting, it suggests Talbot sees a more or less good system corrupted by bad men. In stark contrast to his flat-out refusal to believe men like Critchfield, the benefit of the doubt here is an understatement, Talbot is quick to dismiss Soviet actions as cynical, draconian. The Soviets are, quote, paranoid, even when reacting to actual CIA plots described by Talbot. Talbot's lack of emphasis on class power and the role of the state in creating conditions for capital accumulation lead him to overstate divisions between factions within the ruling class. Divorced from class analysis, figures like Joseph McCarthy assume an outsized role. Yeah, like McCarthy was just some weird outlier who wasn't, supported by the basic class interests of the post-war ruling class who, the Soviet Union, first of all, before the war, you had a rising labor, socialist, communist movement in the U.S. Then the Soviet Union is formally allied with the United States and other Western countries, and then helps win the war. This, huge evil defeated in the Axis that the United States to this day uses as like a major source of national pride 70 some years later. That could make the USSR look too good. What do they got to do? They got to rein it in. They got to do a crackdown. That was obviously in the rational class interest of the ruling class of the United States. Otherwise, communism might have kept getting more and more popular. Absent a scientific theory of imperialism, neocolonialism, and the role of state power, Talbot describes a conflict between an authentically, quote, democratic faction represented by Kennedy and a Dulles-led shadow government as a struggle for the heart of U.S. American democracy. True to liberal form, Talbot blames the, quote, implacable brutality of power itself. You hear this constant. I heard this I don't know how many times growing up in history class and whatever. For the demise of democracy from Athens to Washington, how exactly a proper adherence to democratic norms among slaveholders and capitalists would benefit slaves and imperialist victims remains unstated. Talbot is all too willing to be fooled by a figure like JFK, who opportunistically condemned European colonialism, deftly tying it to Soviet influence and framing U.S. American neocolonial domination as true liberation. By situating Talbot's observations within a materialist analysis, we come to see Kennedy versus Dulles for what it really was, a contest between competing factions within institutions that had a common mission, securing the conditions for capital accumulation. Talbot's book is full of useful information and astute observations. Most of his conclusions are unobjectionable, but our understanding is greatly enhanced when we view his work in the light of the basic framework that Michael Parenti described in the introduction to Inventing Reality. The relationships between institutional leaders like Allen Dulles, business scions, and Nazi bankers are not aberrations or corruptions of a functional democracy. They are the threads which tie the state to its bourgeois masters. While we can't uncritically accept liberal perspectives, we should remain humble, simultaneously learning from and critiquing liberals, just like Marx and Lenin did. Everyone has something to teach us if we're willing to listen. Excellent thread from your communist dad. Also excellent, suggestion there, commenter, for bringing that up. I happened to just be looking at that the other day and was looking for a good time to get into that. So we just got into it. And that's a great example. So it's like if you try to confine yourself exclusively to, socialist writers, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great socialist writers that have put out excellent material. But the idea behind getting, Marxist analytical tools, which is basically what Marxism is that you can go and apply it to things in the existing capitalist world. That's what Marx did, and every Marxist since. So yeah, liberals put out a ton of information, a lot of which is accurate, but you need to obviously come to different conclusions and look at what they are stating in terms of their conclusions critically. This is a key skill. If you can't do this yet, just, take it in pieces. Take an article. Try looking at, who wrote the article, who published it, what is that about? Just keep that in mind. And it doesn't mean that everything that they said is a lie, but you need to question their analysis of the events. So yeah, that's key and a good lesson, and I'm happy to discuss that further. Honestly, these are the kind of core skills that we're trying to develop as Marxists, honestly. Obviously, there's also the application to how to organize effectively and how to resist and how to build political power, but it starts with how to think. It starts with how to look at bourgeois society and to see it for what it is, which includes seeing its strong points that maybe can't be challenged and its weak points that can. So. Let's see. Until about a week ago, I was the only person at my job who wore a mask. Now there are two of us, but she wears a better mask than me. So if you're looking for masks, go to medical supply companies. That's probably the best place you can go, that sell N95s. You can just type in like where to buy N95 mask. Trying to think of anyway, you can get them at like hardware stores because they sell N95s for use in like building, construction because of all the dust and whatever. But you can get them much cheaper and also much more flexible and comfortable masks for medical use. You can get boxes of like 30 of them. So there are still articles out there about that are just like lists of, 15 or 20 different outlets of medical supply companies that sell N95s. It's really worth it. Get a box of 30. A lot of them are going to be like, come out to like $1 a mask or $1.50 a mask, but it's better than getting COVID. So shout out to Sally Rooney. She's an Irish writer whose goal is to write Marxist novels. If you're a college-age person and feel alienation in relationships or life in general, then I'd recommend her novels. It's good to read your own thoughts written in a book. Well, I've never read or heard of, but okay, we'll check out that recommendation. We can take billionaires at their word if they say they are libertarians. What if they claim to be socialists? Yeah, that would be a different story. Uh-oh, we got somebody fucking tankies. Some kind of libcom in here. Behave yourself. Behave yourself. Honestly, the libertarian communism thing, it's a delusion. We all want a free society, and that is always the goal to the like maximum ability of a society to provide that at any given time. Many of the revolutionary societies were deeply constrained for significant periods of time by civil war, counter-revolution, etc. These were not normal, peaceful circumstances. And then even after they got established and came out of a war phase, they were facing massive sanctions, sometimes for their entire existence. So it's not like capitalists just leave revolutionary societies alone. I think we all would like as free a society as we possibly can manage. A lot of times, the quote libcoms have completely unreasonable standards. I mean, yeah, there have been some pretty horrendous conditions in revolutionary societies for a while as they attempted to throw off counter-revolution and everything. But and I don't think anyone was out there like celebrating those kinds of hardships and privations. That's not really the point. That is something that gets worked out as quickly as it can be. This sort of notion that you got from Cold War propaganda somewhere that socialists are just out to do this bait and switch of like just want to dominate your life or whatever. This is, that's the kind of thing that capitalists project out there to scare you off of socialism. Um, there's just not a lot of convincing arguments on this. And, the risk of being cliche, we do have the Black Shirts and Reds, Michael Parenti audiobook up. I think, people would be better off at least trying to engage with that type of material, if not that exact book. It's a decent starting point for at least getting a different perspective. I mean, even to the extent that some of that book is spin, at least balance your fucking spin somewhat seriously. So Mark Cuban is trying to get in on that wealthy philanthropist deification that happens in the US. Yeah, in his own way. I mean, he's done like different things. I think he is a bit more activist than a lot of the billionaires, and obviously he's a libertarian, so not always for very good stuff. But he does seem to be among the more if there's such a thing as a libertarian with some kind of social conscience, that I'm definitely overstating it. Obviously, we know that it's a massive contradictions that you can't possibly fulfill. But he seems to be somebody who's somewhat interested in social outcomes to some extent. I'm really not trying to say he's a good guy. Definitely not that he's on the right track. Far from it. But and again, I'm not like a Mark Cuban expert at all. I just every time I see him, it seems to be some sort of like I don't know if he has political ambitions or what, but he does seem to not. He seems to put significant effort and time into doing things on the like socio political engagement. I'm not stating this very well. You get the idea. Moving on. Recently listened to an awesome podcast episode of Guerrilla History. Quote, Time with the Red Army Faction, with Margaret Schiller, who was tortured by the West German government and early associate of RAF. You get to hear from an anti-fascist hero who was legit tortured by fascists. If that isn't interesting, I don't know what is. That is interesting. I've not heard that episode. Yeah, so here's a comment that's kind of what I was saying about China and COVID. Zero COVID is a good goal, probably unachievable, but a necessary aim. Yeah, you have to aim for that. Whether you achieve it or just come close to achieving it, that has to be your aim. Because COVID, it's like allowing a little bit of fire in your house. You can't allow a little bit of fire because it quickly turns into a large amount of fire. You can't allow it just due to the nature of the thing. There are things that you can tolerate a certain amount of, and it's not going to be catastrophic and it's not going to get way out of hand. COVID, though, is one of those things. You have to aim at zero COVID because eventually we do have to get to zero COVID. It's a disease that will spread and spread and spread and weaken the population from year to year much faster than we can recover from it. So if we don't eventually reach zero COVID, it eventually will cripple us to a point that will be absolutely catastrophic for any type of human organized civilization. So you have to aim for that. You have to. Just that simple. More population than the US and Europe combined in zero COVID. Well, then no, they haven't had zero COVID. But they have controlled it to a degree that is actually what, a large country should be doing. Somebody said, had their first discussion with an anti-ML anarchist, maddening, said I was a right-winger for asking for an example of an anarchist revolution while calling China, Cuba, Korea, USSR all failures. Well, that person didn't know what they were talking about, so, take it with a grain of salt. I love having healthy conversations with informed anarchists, but when people talk to me like I'm some Nazi, it's hard to respect their intellect. Yeah, I mean, people calling themselves anarchists now, it doesn't take much to become an anarchist in terms of learning theory. It does take a lot more to become a Marxist. You do actually have to do some studying. So I think that that's part of it. I think part of it, honestly, is an age factor, though there are young Marxists as well. But something of the psychology of anarchism is somewhat appealing to the developmental strivings against authority and being tired of adults telling you what to do for kids and stuff like that. I think that there's legitimately some of that going on in the online anarchist world. That said, I have also met, anarchists above age 25 or 30, etc. And it is what it is. Some of them are pretty crusty and real and have done a lot of real world stuff, which is great. But I think it's generally time for the US left to stop dicking around and study some fucking theory. So, yeah. Who cares that the state prevented 1 million COVID deaths? Hierarchy is still a thing, so Right. Yeah, that's just hopeless thinking. Hopelessly wrong. Yeah, I don't think that person had a great grasp of what they were talking about. So again, grain of salt. Move on. Was there this much of a resistance to slowing the economy and quarantining the population during the Spanish flu? And if so, where did this cabal of reactionary pandemic deniers find its base? It was, surprise, surprise, exactly the same as now. They were reactionaries, they were proto-fash. Yeah, it was the far right, always. The anti-vax movement, generally speaking, has always been far right. Always. They're always overlapping with all the other far right political talking points. So nothing has changed in capitalism really at all. The technology has changed. The extent of proletarianization has changed versus, agrarian. Like the class composition of society has changed as capitalism has rolled along and proletarianized more of the population. Generally speaking, though, none of the class interests are like substantially different. Those property laws are what everything comes out of. So, um, very little has changed. Go back and, I mean, really read anything about early, first generation fascism from 100 years ago, Mussolini, all that stuff. It's like exactly the same. This is why we can still read Marx and Engels and Lenin from over 100 years ago. It's still capitalism. It's still applicable. Different stage of capitalist development, but basically the same interests moving in the same directions, holding hands with the same people. It's all basically the same. Like for example, Lenin added the more developed thought about imperialism because capitalism came out of that ascendant stage and assumed more of a dominant role. So Marxists had to develop more theories about that more advanced stage of capitalism, which just wasn't as developed during Marx and Engels' time. And today, a lot of that stuff still applies. I think that we can still continue to find new insights and just as capitalism in its fully dominant form, just exhibits any new, by new, I mean added dynamics, it's not really dramatically different. It's just engaging in some new behaviors with increased dominance. Fundamentally, it's still moving in the same direction. It's the same general flavor of things. So, overall, was there this much of a resistance? Not nearly as much as my understanding. But yes, there have been anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers throughout history. Fine, take any issue, there were people on the wrong side of it. So yeah, I mean, as far as were they doing shutdowns, that is a different story, and I don't think I've really read much about that. But people did mask. Of course, they didn't have N95s then, so they were using cloth masks, and they were, I mean, medicine was less effective back then. 100 years ago, um, public health was less developed as a discipline. Um, that said, I mean, there was still more of a sort of collective spirit in society to a certain extent. People were less sort of individualized, so it was a little bit easier to get people to think in terms of common good in certain ways. So things were a bit different. The culture was a bit different. Um, but yeah, like a commenter was saying, there was no slowdown to the economy, I don't think. Yeah, so like trying to coordinate a global shutdown, that would have been a dramatically different situation in the 19 teens. But, you know, so yeah, you have to account somewhat for differences in culture over time. Speaking of fudging the numbers, they started counting gang violence as mass shootings to make the number of mass shooters look less white on paper. Interesting. Haven't read anything about that, so yeah, first I'm hearing about it. I don't know. I mean, the U.S. is a fascist war zone, you know. I don't even know what to say about that. But yeah, I mean, definitely the sort of like mass shooting as we know it is driven by white supremacist terrorists. That's, a while back, these things weren't as common, and it was a bit harder to see the pattern. If you go back to when these things started, like in the 80s and 90s, there were much fewer and far further between. You get into the 2000s, they become more commonplace, 2010s. Now they're like a dime a dozen, but it's a very clear pattern of this overall convergence of the far right, white supremacist terrorism. That's absolutely clear now, whereas it wasn't in, an slightly earlier US that these lines weren't drawn as sharply and it wasn't as easy to see the patterns. So somebody makes a comment about thinking the same thing due to the early 20th century fascist tendencies in the US, but what about the radical workers movement that was being bolstered with the IWW and such? Um, yeah, I mean, obviously radicals also exist, but all these factions exist. They all exist. You look at something like if anybody's read any Sinclair Lewis, wrote a book called Babbitt, which is that was the first thing I read by Sinclair Lewis. Sinclair Lewis had such a pretty good handle, was like a social satirist, and had a pretty good handle on nuance within the US sort of class system, class structure, and the different cultures of different classes. Wrote a book called It Can't Happen Here, which was about a, fictionalized fascist takeover in the US from the point of view of like a liberal librarian, said in I think mid 1930s. So looking at Mussolini and Hitler and saying, what would the US version of this look like? And wrote, fictionalized account of it. Very interesting book. And, what you see reading that book, it's set in the 1930s, is like there was less of an environmental movement back then because the pollution was way less of an issue back then. It just wasn't like as rampant. There wasn't plastic and like all this kind of stuff back then. But aside from that, I mean, that was for me realizing like the political lines have not really changed that much over time. Um, so yeah, I mean, there have been radicals in U.S. history. There have been fascists, and it's just been sort of where the balance has been, who's had power and who hasn't. So somebody says, fair enough. I wish we could cover more documents from situations like these, the Spanish flu, saying pandemics are good. I mean, does anyone say pandemics are good? Um, oh, sorry, I misread. not saying that pandemics are good, but it'd be really useful for understanding what we should do using historical experience, not just quarantining, masks, and vaccinating, but certain political demands we can make or contradictions we can make more clear to workers. I don't think you really need much historical analysis to look at that. You can just take your existing, analysis of overall society today as that has been co-evolving along with, the progression of history, and you can just see how it fits in. I don't really think you need to go back to the past for that. We already have many existing demands as regards the medical system, as regards public health, and so on, worker safety. Just cast it in that light. Again, it's really not brain surgery. What we're lacking is strong organizations who can loudly make those demands and rally the public to them. That's what I'm always saying is like, people, politics is not something that you just do in your mind. You have to actually join and build organizations. If we don't do this, nothing is ever going to change. You are guaranteed nothing will change if people don't organize. So people must organize. It's just non-negotiable. Individuals cannot really do anything in isolation. We have to organize. So, honestly, I've been looking at this for like going on 15, 20 years, and I don't see major changes, maybe in the last couple of years, with regard to people getting a bit more organized. But it's still lagging significantly far behind where it needs to be to even be remotely effective. I've talked about this ad nauseum, and I'll just say that, but it's in virtually every other video I've made has contained at least a few minutes on that topic. The vaccines also fail because they're constrained by IP, so they have not been spread widely enough globally. Heard of doses being thrown out in America as they go bad. Yeah, some of the states where there's strong anti-vax sentiment, they order, like rightfully they order, however many cases of the vaccine, however many boxes of the doses, and then they go to waste because the population's like, it's the death jab, you're not going to stick me with that, and then like a week later they get fucking COVID and die. So yeah, it's been a huge problem. The US does ship out some doses to other countries, but it's like a drop in the bucket. So yeah, they need to make it so that people can just make the vaccines without intellectual property concerns. Really shows that the priority is profit, not lives. As far as messaging, there you go. I'm a little YouTube channel here that has like just over 8,000 subs currently. We need large organizations doing this shit. Like, I'm happy to be part of the emerging, far left media in the US, but there's not really the job just for that. Organizations need to step in and pick this up. I understand recently there was just a thing with DSA where a significant faction of the right wing of DSA refused to take up more of demands on COVID. Now, in fairness, I didn't see a ton of substantiation. A lot of people were repeating it. Maybe where there's smoke, there's fire, though I did not see the full extent of what happened or what the evidence behind that was. But apparently, so it is alleged that some of the right wing of DSA was saying that demanding and running campaigns on more COVID protections as a demand was like unfeasible and unrealistic. And I actually did engage with somebody on social media who was saying like, yeah, it's just not realistic. And I was like, you're enabling genocide by saying that. You're enabling the mass disabling and death of hundreds of thousands of people, maybe more, by buying into that. And the conversation really didn't go anywhere. They didn't have anything, to say about it that made any sense, that was useful in the slightest. But yeah, this has to be done, absolutely. Anyway, there's more to that comment. Only a global concerted effort will stop this from becoming another Black Death. Yeah, because look at, how the virus has already mutated. You really want to see what it looks like in another 2, 3, 4 years? I don't, but I'm sure we will. All we need is the haunting rhyme. This is why communism is so important. Communism rests upon cooperation, where capitalism rests on competition. Competition creates winners and losers. Cooperation allows all people involved to succeed. So, yeah, and we should distinguish, just as sort of a socialism 101 point, we should distinguish between healthy competition or sporting competition from winner take all, winner loses everything, life or death competition. So in capitalism, it really is like winner, loser, and the loser is just out. In socialism, there's a certain amount of friendly competition that can sort of bring out the best as everybody, strives to do their best and gets to show off, whoever makes whatever innovation or, achieves some success the first gets to, have their face on the stamp or be otherwise celebrated, whatever. But it's friendly in the sense that the person who loses doesn't get like completely trashed and left to die. They're still taken care of. It's an actual game. It's not life or death. So yeah, in that sort of environment, you get to make it a game, have fun with it, but not have it be like a war within the society where there's like life and death competition. That's wrong, and that shouldn't be the way that a society is run. So what else do we have here? It's amazing how many left US liberals can handily identify all the most salient issues here, but not then draw the radical conclusions necessary. Yes, some of it is a lack of analysis, some of it is a lack of political courage. There's a long history of blacklisting, I mean serious blacklisting in the United States. A lot of people just don't want to rock the fucking boat, you know? Keep that paycheck coming in. A lot of it is that. A lot of people do know better. Liberals add citations, but then you read them and it's New York Times and Guardian articles as well as other liberal authors' works. Yeah, and again, not everything published in there is factually incorrect, but some of it is. And some of it where it is highly politically motivated will be factually incorrect. Or there'll be so much spin on it you can't even see the original fact. So, I mean, yeah, it's not to say everything written by liberals is usable, but a lot is. But again, you got to come to the different critical conclusion. Uh-oh. Apparently, socialism is for weaklings and sheep. Well, we have no choice but to abandon communism. What can I say? What can I say, holy flesh? Um, you can have a timeout. Bye-bye. Really, you come in and introduce yourself like that, don't expect to get very far. Bizarre. They'll identify as anything but smart. Let's see. Where are we? The comments just jumped. You ever see one of those citations that just ends up being circular? Like they'll link to something and that cites the first thing. Yeah, it does pay to look up citations sometimes. You can, if nothing else, find really interesting things sometimes. Many of the readings on the channel actually were readings referenced in other readings, and I just sort of followed them out. And you get to develop the thought a lot more, and you can see what the whole train of thought is. Yeah. Culture undeniably changes, but how do you think we can begin to create a revolutionary communitarian culture? How do you suggest we combat the individualism ingrained in the capitalist system. Any reading suggestions? Start trusting people and invite people to do stuff. That's a start. I think a lot of the rest of it will sort of, you know, the United States is and has been so pumped up on fear for the longest time. People are just flat out afraid of each other. To some extent, not entirely without reason, with some of the crazy shit going on and the amount of violence in the society, but people are afraid of each other. And a lot of it just starts with building up some just absolute basic trust, not even in a political context. Start with that. Marx did not speak about socialism, huh? You sure sound like you know what you're talking about. Hi. Yeah, beyond that, so there's another comment. Not individualism, but Cuba has done a lot of work trying to eradicate its overly masculine, or we could say patriarchal or male chauvinist culture. Yeah, China also, if you read Mao, he mentions this quite a lot. Um, but again, that's in a, more in a post-revolution society, although the Chinese communists were working on it in the, northern controlled territories as well, where they were, gaining influence and control um, in different regions. Of course, that was context, like very undeveloped country, very little communication, transportation infrastructure, but so they were able to have sort of more control over a region. Anyway, yeah, but combating all those things, like you're not going to get real far with people who aren't exactly like you if you exhibit any kind of bigoted or chauvinist behavior. So, there's that. It is great though for if you want to hide behind a screen and just, like scream at people in social media comment sections. Um, that's where people really excel at being bigoted and whatever else. Um, but yeah, I don't know, basic social skills. Like I think this goes really beyond just the realm of politics. People literally don't know how to talk to other people in the United States. Happy to extend this discussion out further, but I would start there. I should mod you. I don't mind all the sea lions. They're kind of it's fun to ban people. But and then I wouldn't see them. So are you trying to deprive me of sea lions? Keep it in mind. What else do we have here? Cuba is still not a place with perfect gender equality or devoid of machismo, but at least there's an effort. Yeah, this is key, Key. Oh, the Zizek article. Oh man. I hate Zizek. Let's just be blunt about it. I have not really seen anything from Zizek that I have liked to date. I was going to do a commentary. I had the title picked out and everything. I sat down to record, like a hanging with the Sock Dem Gang style, um, blow by blow commentary on the Zizek Peterson debate. I got 2 minutes into it. Not even, no, like 2 minutes counting the introductions. I got about 30 seconds into Zizek talking, and I was just like, nope, this is not going to happen. And I had done all this background reading to prepare for it, and it was just, there was no way. There was no way I was going to spend however many hours of my life commenting on that thing. Uh, so, no, we're talking about the Zizek article on Ukraine. I don't know. Do you want me to do? I don't think I have time to do this right now. So let me at least, for people who don't know, let me get the article. So Zizek, Ukraine. Yeah, I saw that overwhelmingly the reception to this was like, what the fuck? Among the left, like among people that I follow on social media, like what? So it's in the Guardian. from 2 days ago, June 21st. Pacifism. Oh, there's a typo in the title. There's a typo in the original title that shows up in the search engine and in the URL. It's they wrote Pacificism, but there's no I in the ism. They wrote Pacificism. That's cool. Pacifism, as I guess it's supposed to read, is the wrong response to the war in Ukraine. The least we owe, so then the subtitle, main takeaway tagline, the least we owe Ukraine is full support. The least is full support. And to do this, we need a stronger NATO. By the way, NATO is not written as an acronym. It's written like capital N, lowercase ATO. So maybe he's actually not talking about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So that's the catch to this whole article, I guess, is he's not actually talking about that. No, of course he is. It's just an article full of typos for some reason. So, oh boy, the beginning of this article. It starts off with, for me, John Lennon's mega hit, Imagine. That's your starting point. Was always a song popular for the wrong reasons. Okay, imagine that the world will live as one is the best way to end in hell. I can't read this. I can't read this. There, I'm done. And this is usually my response to Zizek, because I get like 3 sentences in, and I'm just like, no. Whatever this is already doing to my brain, I hate it. So anyway, that's maybe I'll do more on it later. Zizek is pretty overhyped. I think overhyped is the tip of the iceberg on Zizek. He owned Jordan Peterson, though. I mean, honestly, most people could own Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson does get owned on a daily fucking basis online. Owned. To the point of, he just recently started tweeting with replies turned off. So only the 500 people who follow him can reply. And he even gets owned by them. But if you look through the quote tweets, it's fucking insane. Actually, today, just today, I retweeted Peterson because he was tweeting. First, he was retweeting anti-trans stuff, and that was kind of the thing he got famous for. Well, famous for recently. He also got famous for the anti-feminist stuff earlier. Where is it? Scrolling backward. I tweeted too much today, didn't I? Since then, at least. Oh, okay. So Peterson tweeted, this was 10 hours ago, one of the sure signs that you're dealing with a malicious or careless narcissist online is their use of LMAO. Lamau, laughing my ass off. That's the tweet. One of the sure signs that you're dealing with a malicious or careless narcissist online is their use of Lamau. And I quote tweeted it. I said, this fucker is off the deep end. Replies off, chomping pills and posting nonstop. So I further mused, I wonder what his clinical opinion is on ROFL. Using LOL, likely bipolar. OMG, thanks for telling us you wet the bed. And don't even get me started on BRB. Might as well up and join the Manson family. What kind of serious person? Clinical psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever the fuck he is. Psychologist, right? Psychiatrist, he'd have to have gone through med school. Anyway. Yeah, so if you use, popular slang online, you're surely a malicious or careless narcissist. Whatever exactly that means. Careless narcissist. Anyway. But yeah, it's not hard to own Jordan Peterson is the takeaway. That's our lesson for today about Jordan Peterson. You don't have to be Zizek to do it. Also, Zizek was a counter-revolutionary in Yugoslavia. Yeah, his doctoral thesis was rejected in Yugoslavia for being anti-Marxist. Yeah, he is not a Marxist. He's Marxist adjacent. People tell me he's more Hegelian than Marxist. I don't know how far that actually gets you in the modern world. From reading Zizek, I don't think very far. So yeah. He doesn't have to be a Marxist to be a good thinker. Yeah, Yeah, but he isn't. I'll just say that flat out. This is my own complete dislike of his work. I honestly like. I'm sure that I'd rather have a Zizek than many other of the right wingers in the festering morass of like U.S. intellectual circles. All the shit that passes for that. If Zizek was the bar for what is right wing or what is obnoxious, even we'd have a better world. But that doesn't mean that I like him. A great work of liberal scholarship is The New Jim Crow, amazing critique of the prison industrial complex, but the conclusions are still constrained by liberal electoralism. Yeah, so let's add another example to that. Piketty, Capital in the 21st Century. I have not read this. That is uniformly what dozens of people have all told me about it. It's like this attempt at being the new Marx, but then he just like sort of wraps up with like, so anyway, we should tax rich people more. So, yeah. The reason I probably hate Zizek is because he's a contemporary to Marx, like a pre-Marx socialist. So, in other words, not a scientific socialist, not a Marxist. I mean, that could be part of it, which I guess, goes along somewhat with being a Hegelian rather than a Marxist. But the main reason is nothing I read of him makes really much sense. I don't read his stuff and feel like, yeah, damn, he nailed it. Never. Like, actually, just the opposite. I feel like my head is being twisted, like Stretch Armstrong, and I'm just sort of, it's not good. It's just, my mind feels warped by the things that he writes. It's not good. To be fair, watching anything with Jordan Peterson in it is mind-numbing, all caps. Yeah, to the point Peterson started putting himself in a coma. Zizek was directly involved in promoting liberal counter-revolutionary orgs in Yugoslavia and supported the NATO bombing, if I'm not mistaken. That I do not know. That I do not know. Maybe Zizek was talking about his cousin, Nato Belish. Let's see. The article has been translated and published in major Belgian newspapers. Yeah, I mean, well, I say for some reason, that's the phrase that leapt to mind. I got halfway through saying it, and I was like, well, of course we know why. I'm not going to publish any Marxist analysis. This is who they hold up as the left. It's like Chomsky, it's like whatever else. People who are not that dangerous to fucking capitalism. So, of course, they hold them up. He's not my friend. I like his work on ideology. I think his popular literary critiques are his real strength more than his politics. That may be fine. I'm not super into popular literary critiques, so if that's the case, that may all be going on without my knowledge, so it's entirely possible. As far as the work on ideology, I've heard this before, but I don't know. What would you recommend as far as the Zizek work on ideology to get, this sense of his strength in that area? Because I'm telling you, most of the stuff I just do not get very far into before just like tossing it aside fairly aggressively. I want Zizek to give me one reason why he's not a Marxist, but a Hegelian instead. Yeah, I don't know. He's a counter-revolutionary. Who knows? Yeah, I don't know personally, like, what was his arrival at that. I do not know. Always the victim, Peterson. Yeah, I have like a crazy amount of Jordan Peterson memes left over from the early S4A days, like back when it was on Facebook. And I'm gonna have to dig those up because really there are a million of them. And how this guy, it's just like what a clown show the right is. That somebody like Jordan Peterson, who just like his thing now is like wearing tuxedos and crying. It's bizarre. Nothing against crying, but there's definitely some, it's like, there's nothing against laughter, but there are certain contexts where it's not really appropriate, where you look at it and go, why is this person laughing? Same kind of deal. Zizek is the epitome of the Western bourgeois intelligentsia in terms of, quote, liking socialism, but, quote, Lenin bad. Yeah, I've never really heard him elaborate on that. There was some documentary I saw about him, which was my first exposure to Zizek, which was like, I want to say it was called The End of Marxism or something like that. It was from 10 years ago or more. And I was just like, who the fuck is this guy? And the video ended with like footage while the credits rolled, I think, of like taking down a statue of Marx. So, I mean, it was pretty clear, I think, the thrust of the thing. Yeah. Sublime, what is it? I just lost it. I just read it. Where did it go? Sublime something from Zizek is good. Somebody was recommending. If somebody could post that again. I literally do not know where it went in the chat. Sublime object of ideology. Okay, there we go. I'll keep it in mind. Let's put that in my be read, to be discovered and read tab. All right, fair enough. And again, I'll probably get like a page or two in. And it just doesn't connect with me. I don't know what it is. Peterson, oh God, is a crypto-fascist using the hyper-real to distract you from his crypto-fascism. Y'all are getting played. I don't know if that was meant to be ironic. I don't think anyone is getting played by Peterson, honestly. I don't think actually anyone is distracted from his crypto-fascism. I think that that has been like plainly pointed out. Only the completely blind have not, and like by completely blind I mean willfully blind, have not noticed Peterson's crypto-fascism, even commented on it. Peterson got an award or honor by the Hungarian state last week. I literally wanted to scream like a medal for being very smart. Nice. So much of everything going on today needs to be flushed down a very large drain. If I'm not into Lacan or psychoanalysis, I don't mind psychoanalysis. It's not that. It's the way he expresses concepts. It is just, he says things in the most, it's beyond even being pretentious. It's, he just states things in these utterly irritating ways. I'm a big fan of clarity and writing even complex concepts, communicating them, expressing them in a way that even people who are, not, pretentious pseudo-intellectuals can grasp them. That's the idea. You want to make ideas accessible. There's, I believe, an Einstein quote that basically the object in communicating, whether it's science, writing, or whatever, is to make things as simple as possible and no simpler. So if you start making it, simpler than the concept, then you're misrepresenting it. But you do want to make it as simple as possible. And I do not think he does that. I think he does the exact opposite of it. And it's this sort of just masturbatory, like, I don't know what his motivation is, but it's like he's just trapped in his own head. Like I feel like you have to be Zizek to sort of get into what he's saying. It's not relatable. I don't know who talks like that. I don't know who thinks like that. It doesn't click. Peterson is the Evola kind of fascist, sees himself as a kind of spiritual aristocrat. I'd say maybe partially. Maybe partially. Evola truly developed the mysticism, though. I don't see Peterson. Well, okay, yeah, he does all the chaos dragons and stuff like that. But I think Peterson is kind of the McDonald's version of Evola, though. It's not terribly sophisticated. Unfortunately, his vague semi-self-help ramblings are eaten up by people who actually need help. Agreed. The media eats him up and ignores his obvious fascism. Yeah, what else are they going to do? So watch BreadTube for 5 minutes. They're all covering the hyper-real, never his open crypto fash. I honestly, respectfully disagree there. I'm not a huge fan of like the bread tube sort of you know, video essay sort of thing that they do. I think that most of it's communicated very badly. I think most of the analysis is not of good quality, etc. I think they get some basic points, like Jordan Peterson is on the far right correct, though. So I'm not really. What specifically are you saying that they're missing? Because I think the misogyny, the anti-trans stuff, like all of that actually is covered very well, even by the lamest bread tuber. So I'm just not really sure, really, what you mean by that. As far as this sort of delving into just, talking about the media rather than reality, it's a certain skill. A lot of people do get a lot of their, experience of the world, not directly, but secondhand through the highly pasteurized and processed media presentation of it. I think that, you know, analyzing that and dismantling that somewhat has its value. That's not really the sort of way that I engage with things, so it's not something that I'm particularly interested in or value or want to promote or appreciate necessarily. That said, I mean, I think we all agree that Jordan Peterson's a right winger. Not really sure what is being missed there. He went in hard for the father figure role. Yeah, that's I mean that was what a lot of the memes boiled down to. There's like the cartoon of him with like the little kid that looks like Bobby Hill sitting on his knee, with Santa Claus, and the kid saying he's got all these great new ideas like Christian conservatism. Yeah, for dumbasses or at least very naive young guys. I mean, yeah, he saw an opening and he's exploiting it. You know, young men growing up without role models, like he's going after those people. It's exactly what the far right does. They recruit the insecure, they recruit people experiencing alienation, and they just attach them to supporting the status quo. This is pretty much what the right wing and any defender of the status quo has done, like, through most of class society. There are some good people from Bread too, but then again, it's not an official group. No, it isn't. Yeah, people often act like BreadTube is this, set thing. There are definitely, if you go to Thought Slime's channel, look at the linked channels. A lot of them sort of link to each other, stuff like that. Um, there's a sort of scene, but it is loose. It's like a music scene, or any other sort of cultural scene. Like there are certain people in the middle of it. There are people on the periphery of it. There are people adjacent to it, so on and so on. So yeah, but I mean, it's certainly of a certain type and a certain tone, certain character. Um, and not all of it is complete garbage, but some of it is. I do the Hanging with the Sock Dem Gang series. That's been 90% probably of my commenting on other channels. I did try some Hanging with the Bread Tube Gang, and honestly, I hated it. Like, I did not like most of the videos that I was watching from that. They were either stuff I didn't really disagree with, although again, you'll have some kind of liberal or like anarchist analysis, so some of the conclusions aren't necessarily correct. But I found like I agreed when we did the Thought Slime video, most of it was pretty good. I'm sure we would disagree on some of the solutions, but this is important, and this is probably the note I'll end on today, is the broader left does need to work together on certain issues. We can't really be treating this like it is a music scene or something like that. We need to get organized into parties and organizations. We need to form massive coalitions that can actually shake society to its foundations. That's what we need to do. This cannot be confined to YouTube and tweets and things like that. So, I mean, we can talk about all this stuff, and there will be always media that reflect the socialist movement. But if we don't have the orgs holding it down in real life, it's literally meaningless. Actually, less than meaningless. It's just wasted time. All right. Well, I'm going to leave it at that for this live stream. Thanks to everybody in the chat today for being lively and fostering a good discussion. Like I said, today was just not a day where I felt like sorting through the 75 current events articles that I happened to open this week because it was just a really busy week for news. But I will get on that more and start to shape some live streams for next week. Yeah, that said, I think this was a decent stream. Probably will put it on the channel. Speaking of, would be remiss to not to mention the current patrons whose names are on the screen. Names of supporters who've been going for a year or longer are in yellow currently. Honestly, I've seen a lot of content creators talking about losing patrons, whether it was Second Thought or Rev Radio, I think, was talking about it. S4A has been pretty steady, but a lot of people bowing out due to financial situations. It's the economy. It's a bad economy. If you can support, it really does make a difference in terms of me being able to, make a time budget for how much time I can spend on this channel. I do really appreciate it. That said, I know it's a bad economy, but we don't run ads on the channel. The patron support is how I'm able to keep spending so much time on it. So I do really appreciate it and don't take it for granted at all. It's amazing that as many people as have been supporting it have been supporting it. And I think we're at 121 patrons right now, which is just awesome. So that's much appreciated, and thank you to all the patrons as always. Otherwise, once the videos are up, engagement, so like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. It really makes a difference. The channel has been growing, coming up on 10,000. We recently crossed 8,000. That's just amazing. At some point, it will snowball, and this message will really be getting out to more and more people. I mean, I think if you've been following the channel for 2.5 years, this is not a commercial channel. We're going to keep doing what we've been doing, same kind of stuff or better. So if you like this and you just want to see more of it and see it get bigger and better and involve more people, then keep supporting it. Whether it's financially or with engagement, spread the word, share the link. That really helps. Because like I said, eventually at some point, it will snowball, take on sort of a life of its own. And then a lot of people will get exposed to a lot more audiobooks and discussions and, an accessible entry point into learning Marxism. So maybe the left can finally start outgrowing some of this anarchism and just going on vibes kind of thing, learning from history and theorizing appropriately off of it. All right, thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.